Oh, thank you. We during the pandemic, we did these programs by Zoom. And then last year, we did a hybrid. We had in-person and Zoom. And this year, we decided we didn't need to do the Zoom part, but we had requests from people who aren't in town who want to be able to watch the program. So we're doing both this year. We're trying to get able to look at the audience as well as get the computer focused on it. We have a great program today, but and it's, I think, especially pertinent as we're, in spite of the weather today, having spring fever. But we'll come back to that. I have a few announcements to start with. First of all, for those of you who are ready to order native plants, our native plant sale is on. You can order online at citizensforconservation.org. There's a flyer out there if you haven't picked it up. And the online sale goes until April 15th, or until we've sold all the plants that we've designated as for pre-orders. Last year, we sold so many pre-orders that we ran out of plants for the sale itself. And so this year, we're limiting the pre-orders at 415, which is not 415 plants, but 415 orders. And we've ordered an additional 5,000 plants for the sale itself. So we are going to run out. And the news is that those of you who've been to our sales in the past, this year it's going to be at our new property at the Hill and Dale Preserve in Barrington Hills. And there's a map on that little flyer if you need to know how to get there. So we're pretty excited about that. We have some barn space there. So if we had the pouring rain like we did last year, we can be inside a little bit instead of out. Could still be cold. Okay. In addition, at the plant sale, we have plants that we don't put in the pre-order because we're not sure whether the growers are going to be able to get them or not. Most of the spring ephemerals fit in that category. So come to this, even if you do a pre-order, come to the sale too, because we will have some plants that we can't put in the pre-orders, some special things. Okay. The sale pickup, for those of you who do pre-orders, is May 5th. That's a Friday. The sale itself is Saturday and Sunday. And if you are a member and you come to pick a pre-order up on Friday, you can also shop on Friday, so you get special early bird experience. And then, so that's May 6th and 7th is the actual sale. Okay. In our program on April 15th here is with Ed Collins from McHenry County Defenders with his great information on oaks. He's done research in Northern Illinois, and the oaks are threatened in this area, and he's going to help us learn what we can do to help turn that around. Ed was originally scheduled for the February program, but had a family emergency, so we've moved him to April. So be sure you put April 15th on your calendar. And if you're interested in buying oaks, which is one of the things that we want people to be doing, is planting oaks in your yard, you need to do that as a pre-order in the plant sale. We tend not to have a lot of the trees available, just hoping that people will buy them at the sale. So we'll do the pre-orders for those. So take a look at that. You also, come spring, may be ready for Habitat Corridors visit. Alicia Tim is in charge of our Habitat Corridors program. For those of you who don't know, she or one of her experts will come to your home and help you identify problem areas, what you might be able to do, what kind of native plants would replace them, if you're at the beginning stages, and which things are invasive and which aren't, any of that kind of information. The visits are free to members, and you schedule them at your convenience and hers or her team. So it's a great benefit of membership, and it's really a useful thing for you to get a little bit of specialist advice before you start perhaps working on a new area to plant. Also, I'd like to mention the Chicago Living Corridors is an organization of which Citizens for Conservation is a member. It is an umbrella group of all of the conservation organizations in the Chicago area. But the thing that is unique to them is they have a map of the individual properties in the privately owned properties in the Chicago area that have been improved. And so the habitats, the yards that Alicia's team works on here get put on the map, and the ones from other organizations do. Your names and addresses aren't on there, but it's showing all of the concept is to try to create a corridor, even though it's privately owned property. So anyway, ChicagoLivingCorridors.org, the map is great. It's interactive. You can go in and see which organizations have put the dots on the map and which areas. And then there's also a map connecting with the public properties like the forest preserves that have been restored. So we're starting to see a whole patchwork of stepping stone habitats, as they're called, of the land that's being improved in the area. Okay, now for our program today. We're lucky to have Matt Evans. He's the managing ecologist for woodlands at the Chicago Botanic Gardens. A great speaker, and he's going to inform us on ecologically safe ways to control mosquitoes. I think we all know that the aerosol spray not only kills mosquitoes if it hits them while they're flying, but also kills the other bugs that the birds need. And especially in the spring, you know, the birds need the larvae and the worms to feed their babies when their babies aren't eating bird seed. So we're trying to be ecologically smart, but still deal with the mosquitoes, and Matt's going to help us figure out how to do that. Please hold your questions till the end. And those of you watching on Zoom, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. And I think Alicia's going to monitor that at the end and be able to get Matt to answer some questions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, everybody here and on Zoom. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about mosquito management, but this isn't going to be one of those, like, here's a product you can go buy, because that's not the answer to mosquito problems on our landscape. So we'll have an okay mix of science and some concepts that you're familiar with and a few new things. I've just started my sort of research on this topic, and so I'm excited to share with you what I've found so far, but imagine that this will evolve. There is a lot of research on this topic, and especially if you start going to places like equatorial regions where mosquitoes are a really life-threatening problem, there's a lot of research going on there too. So today we're going to talk about ecologically safe ways to control mosquitoes. Let me just make sure I can advance the slides. Sometimes you have to click on the screen. Oops. Okay, so in Illinois, the main problem here is public health with mosquitoes. Yeah, they're annoying, but the main problem was public health. And I want to just show you that it's not as much anymore. So in Illinois, West Nile virus was first identified in September 2001, when laboratory tests confirmed its presence in 2 dead crows found in the Chicago area. That's the story. The following year, the state's first human cases, trying to get the mouse over here. The first human cases were recorded, and all but 2 of the state's 102 counties eventually reported a positive human bird, mosquito, or horse case. By the end of 2002, Illinois had counted more human cases, 884, and 64 deaths than any other state in the United States. So everyone who was around then remembers that in 2001, around that time, West Nile was a serious problem. And then later Zika, and not as much malaria or dengue for us. But in Illinois, in 2022, I just wanted to pull what you can find on the Illinois Department of Public Health website. There's a drop-down menu to go by year. So measures to reduce the amount of West Nile in the Chicagoland area and in Illinois have been effective. But what are the consequences of that? We definitely have seen, and Peggy mentioned, that most of our aerosolized spray techniques to get rid of mosquitoes are harmful to other insects, and that has consequences up the food chain. And so today we're going to talk about different ways to control mosquitoes, and a little bit more of a cultural change and holistic view. And so first of all, we just need to familiarize ourselves just a little bit with this cycle here. And it's important to know that there are different kinds of mosquitoes. The ones that bloom like mayflies after big rain events are not disease vectors. They don't carry diseases in as much as we know. But the other mosquitoes, the common house mosquito, the tree hole mosquitoes, and recently, if you've seen one of the Asian tiger mosquitoes, you thought it was like a small bird or something, that is also a disease vector. So control of these critters occurs at these two stages, the adult and the larva stage, and we'll get more into that, and this figure will reappear. So what's the problem? Our problem is that our control methods are ecologically unsafe, mostly. Both the granules put in ponds to control at the larval stage are not selective. They're selective by water column, where an organism is in the water column, and so everything at the top of the water column is killed in those. And so that's not just mosquitoes. There are plenty of insects that also have larval life stages at the top of the water column, just below the surface. And so the real bigger problem here is that there are a lot of areas with standing water and that are just great habitat for mosquitoes and basically nothing else. And so the consequence of that is that there are tons of mosquitoes and not a lot of the other things that might naturally control them or be a part of the ecosystem, like dragonflies, frogs, birds, bats. We'll get into that too. So today, I'm going to be presenting on healthier landscapes, which you might be familiar with, the Chicago Wilderness new initiative for bringing health to our landscapes at a large scale and finding ways to do that. That'll be both a political, a scientific, and a cultural problem. But basically, we have a lot of green space. There are a lot of opportunities for mosquitoes to be very abundant, or there are a lot of opportunities for us to restore these landscapes back to health in order to create a landscape in which mosquitoes are just part of it, and they aren't as annoying or be dangerous for public health, because there are several natural controls. And when we restore land, we've also seen that it looks a lot better too, so people can get behind that. But here's just a way to zoom, or a view zoomed in. This is the green infrastructure vision, which was put together by the Chicago Wilderness Network years ago and has recently been updated. But here you can see the green space, and between the green space, you can see what you're familiar with in everyday life, the suburbs, the city, and the agricultural parts of Illinois starting to the west. But here, this is what you see between those green spaces, right? And that's Barrington there. So, you know, this is an issue for the whole landscape, not for just the forest preserves or other green spaces. So again, here is our landscape. So unhealthy habitats equals more mosquitoes. It doesn't always equal more mosquitoes, because there are other kinds of unhealthy landscapes. And we're gonna kind of keep that, the scope of this talk is not to continue going into like different ways we use our land and some of the problems with that. But here, when it comes to mosquitoes, our preserve system and our suburbs are pretty much the root of the issue. And it doesn't always have to be an issue. So here, we're gonna just go through a couple of visuals to sort of set the stage for what we're talking about. So we have healthy vernal pools or healthy wooded ponds or wetlands that would look more like this and would support fewer mosquitoes for several reasons, which we'll get to, and will also support the abundance of woodland aquatic life and other aquatic life that can help control mosquitoes. So here, this is, you know, oh, that turned out a little blurry, but that's okay. This is the concept of ecological restoration, to cut invasive species out, especially when they are about 100% of the cover of an area underneath the canopy trees. Here's this one's Lake County Forest Preserves. I got this one from the Cook County Forest Preserves website. This is a good example of before and after. So the right side of the trail here is yet unrestored, and we're going to talk a little bit about some scientific studies that have proven that the right side of this trail would support a far greater amount of mosquitoes than the left side of the trail would. So we also have residential areas that we need to be thinking about. This might have been after a heavy flood. It could be a week after. But in any case, the standing water there is certainly mosquito larva habitat and would eventually lead to emerging mosquitoes. We also have things like this on our landscapes everywhere, and these are opportunities. But at the moment, they're challenges, but they could, of course, be turned into like community initiatives to plant together and work together on things, and to also improve the health, public health of the neighborhood, because we are not going to be having reservoirs like this for mosquitoes around. And you might say, yeah, there's still water in that native planting. There is, but there's also mosquito predators. And as we'll talk about, some native plants have a negative effect on larvae. So I also see places like this a lot on our landscape. I grew up on the North Branch of the Chicago River, and it still looks like this at a lot of places on the top photo here. And so I think that this is an enormous opportunity to restore these places, create parks around them. I mean, put park restaurants next to them. You know, this is a huge opportunity for us in the Chicagoland area. Our waterways are basically all channelized because of the farming that happened here for the last 200 years-ish. And so we have a lot of these ditches and channels, and they are tremendous mosquito habitat, and they could be something else. And so that's the reason I wanted to show this photo. So the takeaway: unhealthy landscapes harbor more mosquitoes. And now I'll prove it to you. There are a couple studies that I wanted to go into, but first we're going to talk about integrated pest management. If anybody here has a pesticide license, you know that integrated pest management is basically the use of several approaches to manage a pest. There's no one answer to anything. And so what I'm going to be presenting here today is that some of the common problems, well, I won't be presenting on the common problems because they're well understood. The larvicide and mosquito spraying is basically the way that we're trying to do this right now. And we'll be putting forth a hopefully better long-term, perhaps more expensive, but not in the long-term route to doing this. So what's needed here to control more mosquitoes is a healthier landscape for the ecosystem here that has evolved with mosquitoes for millions of years. There are plenty of predators for them. So we're going to be trying to address the root of the problem here today. And so what are the impacts of ecological restoration? Well, first, let's define ecological restoration. That's understanding an environment, how it's changed, and then putting forth plans and initiatives to restore the biodiversity and remove invasive species from that landscape so that you are therefore bringing it back to health. I'd be happy to talk more about the differences of different kinds of ecological restorations with a few people. So here, I first wanted to show you, we're going to run through some scientific studies now. So the first thing that I wanted to point out in this graph is that in a study done in Illinois, this is down near Champaign, where honeysuckle is a bigger problem than buckthorn is, but very similar effects. And so what we're seeing here in that red box is the bars on this bar graph are higher, and that is the proportion of adults that emerged. And it's always higher with autumn olive and honeysuckle from this study. And the authors go so far as to say that the presence of ornamental lawn shrubs, including many invasive species, is positively associated with the abundance of what's called Culex pipiens, which is the more common mosquito around here, and that they found that in roadside stormwater catch basins, kind of like the channels I showed you in that photo, that are covered in algae and duckweed and other things, including mosquito eggs and larvae, they were positively associated with greater amounts of mosquitoes. So we have one study that just went out and measured where are all the mosquitoes. And what they found also is that mosquitoes were before and after restoration higher in the honeysuckle and buckthorn thickets and places that were dominated by the honeysuckle and buckthorns. But they also found that honeysuckle's microbial community on the leaf is wonderful for mosquito larvae. So when it falls into a pool, the mosquito larvae do really well with that. And we'll get back to that in 1 minute. But first, I wanted to show you this graph, which shows that the orange line being the experiment they did completely changes from about a mean of 40 to 60 mosquito adults per trap in that area that they found to just below 10 in most cases. And the two different levels of this graph, top and bottom, are just two different sites. So in order to be responsible in science, you don't want to just present one site somewhere because you never know if there was a difference between the sites. But that gives us more confidence, and this study gives us more confidence that that reduction or elimination of honeysuckle and buckthorn from these sites significantly reduces the abundance of these mosquitoes, these vector-carrying mosquitoes. And they were careful to make sure to be looking for the right species of mosquito because, as I presented before, the floodwater mosquitoes are not disease vectors. So there are several other studies, just like this one, that show that honeysuckle and buckthorn leaves, because of their microbial community on them, support the larvae of mosquitoes better than other ones do. And so let's talk about that for a minute, because they did another study. They took that result and they said, okay, we're going to look at that larval stage again, and we want to know how many of these larvae are maturing to adults in places with native species and in places with just dominated by honeysuckle. And so in this graph, we're looking at the purple bar here. They used Rubus alleganiensis, or the common blackberry, which is a native plant that is abundant on our landscape because it is a grazing increaser. This area of the world was, my job as a forest preserve ecologist 100 years ago would have been to tell you where to graze your cattle. Cattle don't eat blackberries because they're thorny. So we have a ton of thorny plants on the landscape. Ones that are moved around by birds, like blackberries, are even more abundant. And so we have a lot of these thorny plants on the landscape. If you've been in a degraded woodland or prairie somewhere, you probably are familiar with them pulling at your legs and scratching up your hands. So we have a lot of blackberry on the landscape. So they chose that species. And what they found was that a high number of larvae are attracted to blackberry leaves. That's why these purple bars are so high. It's the mean number of larvae per leaf, which is up to 60, 75 almost. And so how many of those are emerging as adults? Oh. It turns out that, see that purple bar there, very low, and the red bar, which is honeysuckle, is very high. So we're seeing in what these scientists are calling an ecological trap, which was a new concept to me in mosquito management. It is a concept in bird habitat restoration. There are some habitat restorations that actually act as bird sinks. We won't get into that too much, but basically, if it looks like great breeding habitat and it doesn't turn out to be, that can be a problem. And it can also be a solution to mosquitoes. So what they found here is that the bacterial community on the leaves of the common blackberry basically eliminates mosquitoes. And so that was interesting to find, and they will be doing further studies on this sort of ecological trap concept, because what you're doing is you're attracting mosquitoes somewhere, and then they are not emerging as adults after eggs are laid there. So just to illustrate that a little bit, here we go. We have a honeysuckle pond. Basically, honeysuckle will grow around the edges of our wet areas and in our wet woodlands. And it's attractive to lay eggs, and then many mosquitoes come out. But if there are blackberries, and they will be studying further other native plants. This study was from 2015, and there are a few more, or this one was 2018. The first one with the honeysuckle removal significantly decreasing the amount of mosquitoes was 2015, but this was 2018. So anyway, they're both very new. And so by planting certain plants, we might be able to create ecological traps for mosquitoes. That is an interesting concept that we'll see how much farther we can take. It also turns out, and this one's from 2021, that there are similar problems with invasive species on the Lyme disease front. So ticks and Japanese barberry have been tied together so closely that the elimination of Japanese barberry from an area makes parks and recreation areas and natural areas far safer. And this has mostly been conducted out east, these studies, but there are several studies that are summarized. And I think it's important to read this whole quote to you, so I'm going to. The authors write at the end of the paper that as a tenet of ecological restoration, ecological countermeasures could become standard operating procedures for zoonotic diseases, disease prevention and response. Overall, ecological countermeasures may be more public-friendly and provide substantial returns on investment for projects explicitly focused on zoonotic disease mitigation, while magnifying the returns on investment for natural resource projects with other primary goals, like mitigating climate change. So by improving the environment, not only are we addressing mosquitoes, we're addressing some of these other issues as well, which tend to be large in scope. And the only way to really fix them is to get to the root of the problem. Whereas what we're seeing today in mosquito management is really like an industry with a product. But if we had a different landscape, that industry and those products wouldn't be necessary, or they wouldn't be used quite as much. And so there are ecological restoration answers to our mosquito problems. And I think that ecological restoration is a great vehicle for several things to improve our culture, society, and landscape. And I will always be preaching that a little bit because it's my job to improve habitats, and firsthand seeing how those changes impact the public and the environment has, really inspired me to do presentations like this, so that I can communicate those results with people and show them pictures that I think will help everybody understand. So and now we're going to move from plants and their removal or their presence, the blackberry, being an answer to mosquitoes, to the mosquito predators and competitors. I'm sure that you've heard a little bit about this. I know that Cindy Crosby was here last week, and she was talking about dragonflies. She may have mentioned to you that dragonflies are among the best hunters on the planet. Lions, you might think, are great hunters. They score about 2% of the time. Dragonflies capture their prey that they're going for about 97% of the time. So it's just a completely different ball game when you are talking about insects. So these are just a few of the common ones. Yes, spiders, fish, frogs. Does anybody know what that is in the bottom right? It's a dragonfly larva. Yeah, so dragonflies actually spend several years, in some cases, in the water as a larva, growing slowly like that. And then, like many insects, like Luna moths, Luna moths actually don't even have mouth parts. Their adult form is just for breeding. It's for reproduction. So the beautiful Luna moths flying around don't even eat. They don't pollinate anything. They're just mating. The caterpillars are the main part of that life cycle. So there's a lot to know that we don't know about these insects, the animals around us, and what ecological restoration can do to benefit some of the pesky ones that we have around. So I just wanted to show you a video to break up the talking. So maybe this will work. We'll see if it works. So here's a dragonfly searching around for a mosquito. They're pretty easy to observe too. They don't run away from you. If you hold your finger out, sometimes they'll land on you. So you can hear birds. That means the habitat. And now it's back. And there are the wings. And it's going to eat that mosquito. So it really happens. We have it documented on film. So these mosquito predators are a really good helper. And bats, and birds, frogs, all these animals are part of the ecosystem. And when we take away what is needed for our native plant and animal communities to thrive, we also create the conditions for some of those pests to thrive as well. And I know I've said that before, but that really is the take-home message. So this is a review paper, and I wanted to present some of the science today because I could stand up here and say that I believe in ecological restoration and it's going to help, and just visually I know that it does, but it's important to quantify things in order to get everybody on board. And to have a document for the future. What about when my grandkids are around and they say, well, yeah, there's been data for a long time about all this. We better listen to the science. So this is what's called a review paper. A review paper is when a group of scientists get together and they look at all the papers they can find about a topic and they summarize the findings. It can be challenging. It takes a long time to do that. But here on the right side of the bottom, you can see all the different studies. Some of them are a little older. But in almost every case here, the predators have had a huge impact on the mosquitoes. So I'll just read a few of them to you. from 1997, predators killed 69.1%, 68.7%, and 43.2% of immature mosquitoes in the flooded grassland, semi-permanent pool, and temporary pools, respectively. The predators dominated by dragonflies reduced larval survival by 58%. That's not a small number. That's a big number. And even this one's big, a significant reduction of 32.4%. And then no mosquito larvae were found when predators were present in aquatic ecosystems in some of these studies. So this review paper really sort of drives home that there aren't a lot of examples of predators not having a positive impact. What they did find in a few of these studies was that when there are not enough mosquito larvae around or mosquito adults, that the predators run out of mosquitoes to eat, so they start working on other things. But that means that there already aren't enough mosquitoes around to be an issue, right? So that's kind of good. And then they also found that there are some regular predator-prey conceptual interactions that do play here. Like if there are too many predators of different kinds, maybe like a place has too many, then it cannot be quite as effective. But I think that there's a lot to study here still. And so here, we're not going to go through a ton more studies, but I'll summarize a few. So one on insect predator or mosquito predators suggested that aquatic predators struggle to colonize or succeed without the right habitats for them. So that's the concept that we need to restore the ecology of our areas. We can't just continue to live with all of these degraded areas full of buckthorn and honeysuckle, which is about 36% of the Chicago wilderness area's canopy. The other authors suggest that isolated degraded wetlands have a greater mosquito density because predators need connections to get there. So that's two studies that say that habitat connections, like the project that Peggy was talking about, the healthy corridors, I can't remember what, habitat corridors. Yeah, it's a really important concept. And we're not going to designate corridors. We should have people incorporate native habitat plantings in their yards to create corridors everywhere, as the famous Doug Tallamy would preach. So I wanted to highlight this last one. I found in most of these studies that the scientists suggest that all programs for vector control, so public health oriented programs, and especially for the control of mosquitoes, completely rely on community participation in order to be successful. So the local government without the community isn't going to solve it. The scientists without the community are not going to reduce mosquito numbers on the landscape and therefore improve public health. And also, the annoyingness of mosquitoes. So community participation is key in this landscape type approach to getting to the root of the problem of mosquitoes and the public health problems that they cause. So amongst all of the nice figures and photos, we do have a few wordy slides here to summarize some of the science. So in summary, the unhealthy ecosystems overrun with non-native invasive shrubs harbor more mosquitoes. And when they're removed, this dramatically lowers the amount of mosquitoes that are present in an area. One concept that was involved in there too is simple. It's the wind. When you are in a buckthorn forest, there's no wind. There are many more mosquitoes when we're in places that are less windy. And so here in Illinois, our open oak woodlands, our natural open oak woodlands, when we open them up again, wind is a factor in the ecology of these systems. And it helps reduce the amount of mosquitoes that are bothering people who are recreating in the preserves or even out in the suburbs. I kept finding on researching ways to control mosquitoes on the product side, fans. Lots of websites promote the use of fans in your backyard, which I thought was silly. But perhaps if you had a really bad problem, a nice big fan would actually help a lot because mosquitoes have tiny little wings and they can't deal with all that wind. So the ecological restoration is important for a lot of reasons, both physical and biological. It turns out that honeysuckle not only kills our native plants, it also promotes mosquitoes. So that is important to know. If we didn't know that, we might say, or people who may be pushing back on the idea of getting to the root of the problem by restoring our ecosystems and our landscape between our preserves and our residential landscapes and urban places. They might say, well, honeysuckle is not the problem. Well, it is. So we figured that out. And it turns out that the mechanism for that is leaf bacteria. And so that is an important finding to fuel future studies, to give future researchers a place to start from, to say, okay, well, now we know it's the bacteria. That's actually a pretty small corner of the web of life in an ecosystem. I mean, it's huge, of course, it's bacteria and they're microbes, but at least we don't have to be searching everywhere for solutions. We know that there might be a microbial solution to this. And then it's interesting, some native plants turn out to be these ecological traps. What else they're trapping, that's going to be interesting to figure out. But if mosquitoes have been here for a very long time, evolutionarily speaking, along with the rest of the counterparts in the ecosystem, it would be safe to say that there are some other things that are impacted by the ecological traps. But when you have most of the ecosystem together, I think it's probably also safe to say that there are natural controls of populations of all things, and that's kind of just how ecology works in a natural system. Things limit each other, things promote each other, and you wind up with a complex system, and understanding that system better will help us in managing mosquitoes. So it turns out that mosquito predators are great at eating mosquitoes at multiple life stages. Mosquitoes have a somewhat complicated life cycle where they're both in water and in the air, but there are predators at every stage. And predator abundance and ability to control mosquitoes relies on healthy habitats. That's not just a sentence I came up with. The scientists from these studies are saying that. They're saying healthier corridors and connections help with predators moving to places where mosquitoes are going to be. And in isolated, degraded, wet areas, the mosquitoes are more abundant. And so that's a scientific finding, not just an opinion. Community participation is critical. I'm sure that they could come up with some data to support this, but this was not in their scientific findings. This was a conclusion of theirs, which is really important as well. And what can you do? And this is our last slide. So after this, we can have a discussion. But what you can do is help to change the landscape. That is done personally at home. You can volunteer in the preserves. You can support the preserves in various ways politically and also through your volunteerism. And we can change places from that bottom center left to the bottom center right, which is a healthier landscape that will have more predators and more natural controls on mosquitoes. Your landscape, our landscape in our yards and between our yards is critical. It's one of the places that are not looked at. So while I do think it's a good idea to go outside in your backyard and make sure that little pots don't have standing water in them, dump them out after rain events because they will harbor mosquitoes. They're a pot, not an ecosystem, so there will be no controls and very few predators there. But if you can account for the spaces between your property and others and public property, it stands to reason from the science that there will be fewer mosquito larval nurseries between our properties. And so that is an important part of this. And with that, these are just some pictures. I mean, the top left would be, every business park. I drove down Lake Cook Road to get here from the Botanic Garden today, and there's several business parks that are just lawn, several acres of lawn. I think we need to start moving away from that. And I know that we are. I wish for revolutionary change, but I understand it will be incremental. And home landscapes are really the key. And we see now, especially in Cook County, after the referendum passed, that they're doing many more projects to remove invasive species. And they always had the plans to, but not enough resources to do the scale that's needed. So we live in a time where we have a lot of these non-native invasive shrubs that promote mosquitoes and kill most of everything else. And we are fortunate to recognize that and to have constituencies of people who recognize it and just voted to increase the amount of money that the Forest Preserve has to do this work. So with that, I think that we're moving in the right direction, but it's important to continue to tell the stories that the answers to some of our pests are not chemicals or products that you buy at the store or industries that are just going to continue to need mosquitoes in order to have their industry. I want to just say that our landscape and the way that we treat it and manage it has a lot of impacts on the pests around us. Fragmentation being one. I don't have a map for this or anything, but deer, poison ivy, grapevine, some of these pests that we think of are edge species. They're woodland edge species. And when you have created as much edge as we have here, they are the dominant animals and species of plants around us. And so if we can understand that and start to find ways to creatively change it on a natural level, I think that we'll be able to make a lot of significant positive differences in our local environment. And one day maybe we won't have a skunk problem or a mosquito problem. And so the way we treat our landscape really matters. And I hope that I've been able to provide a little bit of the scientific side of that and also the cultural and regular observation side. But with that, I'd love to open it up to discussion because this is a new topic for me. I was excited to do this presentation when Peggy reached out to me because I'm a plant ecologist. I don't research invertebrates and mosquitoes, and I have no plans to be an entomologist, but as an ecologist, recognize that I have to have at least good understanding of some of the interactions with the plants that are out there. And a lot of that is animals. I mean, plants rely on animals for reproduction for the most part. So I am excited to talk about it with everybody and perhaps provide an update in a year or something like that, because there's a lot of research to do. Well, thank you. Yep.
Hi, this is just me as being an outsider person myself. One thing I didn't hear you bring up is my observation that mosquitoes tend to be in shady areas versus more sunlight areas.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Can you repeat?
Oh, yes. Thank you. So the question was that mosquitoes are usually more present in shady areas opposed to sunny areas. And if I could just touch on that quickly. That is true from my observations. I didn't encounter any studies that specifically measured like light level to mosquito abundance, but they did measure the honeysuckle dominated forests, which are very dark, in comparison to open oak woodlands that are restored. And so I would think that just by association of removing the honeysuckle and the shade that it causes, in order to create that bottom center right photo, which is a healthier oak woodland, completely vegetated across the bottom, and that's all a consequence of sunlight. So if those species were present there originally, they would expand over time. If they weren't, you'd have to seed them in, but the sunlight is the driving force of our oak woodlands, yeah. And so I think that you're right on with the idea that mosquitoes are less abundant in sunnier places.
Are you aware of any studies about reed canary grass and mosquito population?
The question was if I'm aware of any studies about reed canary grass and mosquito population. I'm not. Yeah, I would personally speculate that reed canary grass, because it eliminates all the other biodiversity around it, does not provide a good habitat for dragonflies, bats, birds, snakes, frogs. Many of us in here have probably seen reed canary grass dominated habitats, and they're pretty sterile. There's not a lot going on there. Yeah, great question. I would think that that's true, but I didn't encounter any studies. Yeah.
You said you weren't going to tell us what products to go buy. One of the products that's out there are the dumpsters that we have bacterium that will eliminate mosquito larvae. Do you have any insight into how effective or what else those might be
Yes, the question is about those mosquito granules or dunkers, as they're sometimes called, which you can throw into a pond or a wet area, and it will prevent the larva from maturing to adults. Yeah, those products, there are several studies on them. I didn't present them today because we're sort of, like you said, wanted to present on the landscape issues. Those products are generalized to a part of the water column. So they create a barrier at the surface of the water. So most anything that is present trying to emerge from anywhere in the water column, if it's trying to get out of the water, during the time that the bacteria, which is about like a 20-day, you're supposed to like reuse it every 20 days because it wears off or the bacteria die out. That window of time, that window of time when it's covered like that with bacteria will eliminate the emergence of most things. So it's a generalized practice that, yes, controls mosquitoes and everything else for the time period that it's there. Yeah, great question. I think that in the future I could maybe present a slide on that so that people have a better understanding, but the science is clear. Yeah.
I have a question kind of related to that.
Yeah.
So I have my own personal property. I mean, my personal property is kind of stored, turn it into a result of a lot of clearing all that out. And mosquitoes were everywhere before that. Immediate, reduction in mosquito stuff. But I'm just wondering, is there certain things? I also on the property with a pond, runs through the property. I haven't done anything with the pond, and just wondering if there's things I could do with the pond that would help attract predators. If you see the dragonflies are coming back, I have to be honest, mosquitoes were so bad when the first thing that I had to spray. But I got away from that, and I'm noticing besides the reduction of mosquitoes, just from the restoration, predators are coming back. I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Things I could do with the pond that would attract additional predators. I don't see a lot of bats. I'm wondering if there's things you can do to attract bats to your property. Whether there's certain native plants that could specifically bring in certain kind of predators.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, are there ways to bring in the predators or to invite them? Yes, it's planting native plants, but you need to make sure that you have blooms across the growing season. So if you wanted to load it up with swamp milkweed, that's great, but it's only going to bloom and attract a lot of insects because the flower, the plant, is trying to attract insects. And that includes insect predators because the predators go where the prey is. And so if you plant native plants in diversity and abundance, but making sure to account for the flowering time. Go through and look at that flowering time column in the brochures and on the websites and figure out how you can cover every week of the year, every week of the growing season. I've created a few of those. I could email you if you want to come get my card afterward. But covering the whole growing season is important because you might plant a bunch of native plants, but they only bloom for 2 weeks of the year of the growing season, and they're green for the rest of it, and they're not really attracting that many insects as they could be if they were blooming. Does that help?
Yeah.
I came across this statement, and I'd like your feedback on it. It said poison in mosquito spray is natural. It comes from chrysanthemums, which evolved to kill bugs.
Yeah, that's true. Pyrethrin is one chemical that came from plants. I don't know if it's chrysanthemum, but it did come from plants, and I'll spray that on my pants early in the season. It's one that you can put on your clothing. And yes, it did come from plants for the purpose of defending against insect predators on the plants. That's what we call a secondary metabolite in plant ecology. It's the weapon. It's the plant makes a weapon. And that's chemical warfare in this case. And basically what humans have done is they have synthesized that. They've studied it and found a way to make it in a lab. And then you can aerosolize it and spray it. I was reading that even the 3 ounces per acre that they use, a little bit, is pretty bad for all the other insects around. It's terrible for mosquitoes. It kills them on contact, but we did not come up with the methods for killing these bugs in our chemical compounds. Those chemical compounds came from nature first. So that is true. Yeah.
It kills other bugs too.
It does. And that's one of the worries with the blackberry example. With the blackberry example, you know, we've identified a species of plant that has a bacteria on the leaf that can negatively impact mosquitoes and is pretty darn good at it. What else is it impacting? The studies need to be, it's probably the same kind of, well, it's not, it's a bacteria, not a chemical compound, but it is a similar mechanism, or is it different? I think that there's a lot of room for research in that area now, and now people are going to start to do that. Yeah. But yes, the chemical compounds used in our mosquito controls come from the environment. And the larval, so it's a chemical compound for the sprays, and for the larvicide, the dunkers, it's a bacteria. It's a bacteria that grows in water and spreads and occupies, it's a physical barrier. What it does is, at a microscopic level, creates a barrier at the top of the water. That's why it's non-selective. If anything, trying to get out of the water that's small enough to get caught by that, big things like a fish will pop its head right through, obviously. But so the size of the organism trying to emerge matters too. Yeah.
I think I heard that there's a different species of mosquito predominant in the daytime and a different one predominant at night. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, I don't either. That sounds interesting. I would believe it though. I think that's probably true, because the same thing happens across other organisms. You know, there are birds that are more present in different times of day, and animals that are diurnal versus nocturnal. Yeah, so I think that that's true. Sorry, I don't have an answer for you though. I would suspect it's true though. Yep.
The spray you mentioned, you would use on your pants at the beginning of the season. Is that something that is perhaps more safe to use for folks who are out in the field more?
Yeah, for people out in the field like me all the time, it's the ticks. It's not the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes, I like to use physical barriers. I just wear long sleeve shirts and wear a mosquito net sometimes when it's really bad. But there are some other bug sprays that are good. There's a new one that Off makes with picaridin in it. It's in a clear bottle, kind of. It's like a transparent, translucent bottle. That one I find to be really effective, and it doesn't have any DEET in it. DEET, for those who don't know, is a physical barrier as well. It creates a film on you that a mosquito cannot penetrate. It also melts plastic. So you'll see that on your clothing sometimes. It can impact the fibers that are synthetic in your clothing. Yeah. And that's why I want to present on the root of the problem, not necessarily these techno fixes that we have. It kind of reminds me of like the companies that are coming out with machines to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's like we have trees, and you can plant trees everywhere. Or prairies. Prairies also take carbon dioxide and store it in the land. Yeah. For ticks, I use, the question was, sorry, Zoom folks, I haven't repeated the question for like 3 questions. The question was, what do I use on my pants for ticks? I use, it's a yellow bottle spray called pyrethrin, or permethrin, sorry, I just mixed that up, permethrin. And it's, you just spray it on your pants, and you let them dry for 24 hours, and then you're good for a little while. There's also a company called, oh, I don't know that one. I was gonna say Bug Guard or Insect Guard or something, where you'll request to have your clothes treated, and they will send you a bag. You send back a couple pairs of clothes, and they treat them for you. One thing that I worry about with that is walking through our really high quality remnant prairie areas. If we have like a nature preserve grade A, grade B prairie, you know, where a lot of the life is still there, I don't like to walk through there with those pants on, because I don't know what I'm brushing up against. The insect life is some of the most precious there in those places. Yes, we understand the plant community. We know that there are 1,700 plants in our region, which is comparable to the Grand Canyon National Park. So you might have heard that comparison before, that the Chicago wilderness area is as biodiverse or more than the Grand Canyon, which is really cool. Just because it's the desert doesn't mean it's not biodiverse. It's super diverse there, biologically speaking. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Why you don't want to wear those kind of pants.
Yeah, thank you. The bugs that are in remnant prairies are still mostly undescribed in a lot of cases. We're finding new ones all the time, and so it's important not to eliminate things before you find them, as a principle. Yeah.
How do we get people to stop selling Japanese barberry?
It is outlawed as a noxious weed, isn't it?
Is it? I don't know. Everything.
Yeah, we should look that up. Oh yeah. How do we get people to? The question was, how do we get people to stop buying Japanese barberry? And I'm pretty sure that it's a noxious weed, so it's illegal to sell now, but that could be wrong. I'm not sure. And it could be different in different places.
About that, if you go to the landscape, or go to the guys who are recommending what to buy,
Yeah.
and then also if you see your neighbor with some free porch, a lot of people who should go buy with the neighbor. Or go to who's selling it too, that's just, individual folks.
Let's educate the nurseries then.
Right.
Right. So nursery education and landscape firms, companies, it's important to educate them or share with them the impacts of some of these species. And so, and the joys of natives, exactly. And so I've brought some pamphlets that are out on the table out there that have everything from healthy hedges to just general healthy backyard practices in them.
I might also say we have a brochure out there on talking to landscapers about healthy yards, and we even have it in Spanish if that's what we have a translation. So it's the things he's been saying, but it's written down in Canada for him,
That's great.
or having labels or something.
Yeah, that's.
On a point of real quick, because I have the internet available. I see that it is not allowed in the city of Chicago, and it's listed
Thank you
as
so much. I like.
a threat in Illinois, but it doesn't look like it's actually banned in Illinois. So that would be something as far as letting people know, letting the gardeners and the nurseries know, that would be amazing.
And so that's where when I mentioned briefly that there are political solutions to this issue as well, that's one of those examples. It's to the referendum was a big one, and then, going out to your local government and the landscaping firms around to make sure that they know what the impacts of these things are. Yeah.
Back to the question kind of about ponds. Are there things you can do aside from like planting native plants around a pond, but like aeration or like introducing dragonflies or
Yeah,
other
absolutely. So you can purchase dragonfly larvae and you can introduce them to a habitat. That's definitely an option. And aeration also came up as an option in some of the studies. There were fewer mosquitoes in aerated ponds and in moving water generally. And also to the pond question, you could work so hard on a pond restoration, and if the surrounding properties around you are just honeysuckle, it's not going to work as well as I said it will. It needs to have there needs to be a landscape-sized impact here, and that's what I think is important to present on, is that this isn't a yard by yard. That's the way to start, but we will see dramatic reductions in mosquitoes when we see dramatic reductions in non-native invasive shrubs and degraded habitat everywhere. So I think it's worth talking to your neighbors and your community and showing up for things like this and at other events where your community members will be around. I think those conservation at home signs that people put in their front yard are useful tools. But yeah, and not to get you down about your pond restoration, but it is true that the surrounding landscape around you is going to be important. What you will find, which is amazing, and just always blows my mind, that if you create just a little bit of habitat, the predators and the native birds and the butterflies, they come back. I mean, if you plant one milkweed plant, a monarch will lay eggs on it, and it will have a caterpillar, and whether or not that caterpillar makes it to adulthood is chance, but it's true that when you build it, they come. I've seen it time and time again. I don't have data for it, but it is something that people corroborate across the landscape. Yeah.
I suppose something like wind could be a big factor, but how large of an area
Sure, yeah. So some mosquitoes are known to go up to a mile from where they're born. So there are tropical mosquitoes that travel 100 miles, but up here in Illinois, what they found was about a mile. Yeah. There were some cases of 10 miles, but I think they were a little unsure about the results of that, so they wanted to back off and say most of the time it's about a mile. Yeah. So mosquitoes don't travel too far.
I was hoping it would be more like a few hundred feet.
I know, but if they catch a breeze, yeah. Yeah.
I just, was not expecting the information you were going to say. I thought that was really exciting. And just the point you're making about the Genetic Library now is getting, looking at the internet, is that it also that these are invasive species, but it doesn't mention the valuable information you're providing about the mosquito impact. And, you know, what impact would that have if more people are educated?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's important to get this information out to people. You can do all the science and it wouldn't matter if it doesn't get to people. Yeah.
This isn't really a question, but if you want a request, is there a way you could do a program on ecologically good ways to remove ticks?
I could do the research and see what I come up with. It's something that I want to do as in this role at the Botanic Garden, is to be somebody that the general public can come to answer those questions for them. So I'd be happy to. My hunch is it will be different. They're different. It's a different animal. Yeah, they are at this point. Yeah, they are. And even just that sentence is complex. I want to unpack it a little bit, if that's okay. We spray a lot. And we put the larvicides in all our pools and wet areas. That we're doing that right now. And so the West Nile numbers that I showed you, the fact that there were 31 cases and only like 1 death or something in 2022, that's because we have control over that vector disease spreading aspect of the mosquitoes. At what cost? What else have we impacted in order to do that? And you may have heard of the Great Insect Apocalypse or something like title like that. But it's largely due to our practices of pest management. Whether or not that's crops that we don't want other animals eating, including insects, or it's we don't want mosquito disease vectors. So it has been effective, the spraying, but it's the nuclear option. And we've really hurt the environment in that way.
Honeysuckles, by the way, are the first shrubs to get their leaves. Absolutely first. So when you drive down the street and there's wires on the side of the road or oak trees or whatever, you're going to see this entire population of honeysuckles on either side of the road. First ones to get crazy, then comes buckthorn. So as soon as you see it and you start recognizing the bark and the way that the stem structure comes out of the ground, you can get rid of honeysuckle pretty easily.
And buckthorns the last.
Well, they
mostly have previous.
yeah, I think they keep their leaves longer than honeysuckle. Buckthorn does, I don't know, time for fall.
Yeah, there's some annual variation.
Technically, we recommend, I believe, removing those woody species in the fall or winter when the sap is not rising from the root system, because the herbicide goes down into the root better. And you have to cut it at the stump, and you have to treat the herbicide or figure out a way for no funding for a long time. So I use herbicide.
Yeah, that's probably good to touch on. So when do you remove honeysuckle and buckthorn? We usually do that in our area in the winter and in the fall and in early spring. Anytime the ground is frozen and the other vegetation is dormant. It doesn't matter as much if you're going to a place that has been honeysuckle for 100 years and it's dead, ecologically speaking, because you're not going to be harming anything else, but it will be hot and harder to do with more mosquitoes around if you do it during the summer. So doing it during the winter is great. I included that photo down there on the right of those people gathered around a bonfire eating snacks. That's what it looks like to remove honeysuckle. It's fun. It's a good time. You get together with people, you get some physical exercise, you get to be outdoors, and the before and after of this kind of work is really satisfying. So, yeah.
My experience has been best to get it early in the spring if you're going to kill it off by taking the work trees. I read a number of articles about that early in the spring, it's still sending stuff down to the road. And it'll kill, it may take till the end of the summer to kill it off, but I've had the best success with the honeysuckle in my yard.
Without cutting it.
Getting them right when they're starting to put the leaves out.
It's a good strategy. I like that strategy for some of our clonal invasive species. So black locust is one where if you cut it, you give it the chemical signal to resprout.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so
and-
what you want to do is just paint those stems,
Yeah,
little ones.
I
Yeah.
think about a foot worth. Well, I think
Yeah.
it's a really big one.
Yeah,
But,
that's the way to do it.
take the whole paintbrush and just stab away.
Yeah, that's the way to do that. It does leave a dead shrub standing there that you have to deal with afterward, but yeah.
For a while, I
Yeah.
plant new stuff in front, and I kind of got chewed out by Kelly Shaw from the hostility place, saying, oh, no, pull it out right away.
Hmm.
You know, my birds love all the sticks they're able to land on. in
Yeah.
the yard. And if you pull all the stuff out that I kill, I'll have nothing left, because the new ones you plant take a while to
They
grow.
do, yeah.
So I'm planting the new stuff in front of the stuff I killed off. I kill it off so that it does get the roots killed and
Yeah.
they keep growing. And now this year I'm finally taking out some of the honeysuckles I killed 3 years ago. They finally have died fully at the surface, and I can just break them off and carry them away. But the birds still have places to sit.
Yeah, it's a great way to do it. And there are ways you'll find your own way to manage some of these invasive species on your land. And I think that that's just a great story. Thank you for telling that, and for everybody in your community who's here today to hear that.
And I'll throw in another 2 cents. I worked with another conservation group, and they were intent on, this is an oak savanna. They took out cherries, they took out red buds, they took out walnuts, because it was an oak savanna. I said, no, you need all of those things. I had an arborist come to my yard and tell me, well, yeah, that's an elm, and the only good elm is a dead elm, and it's gonna die eventually. And that's the first tree to start sprouting. I've had the goldfinches all on top of it in January. They start sprouting a little bit in January. So they're the first ones that all the birds are in. And
Yeah.
the redwoods.
I know they're back a little early this year. I wasn't expecting to see them 3 weeks ago. They were here.
They were late. I was getting them the 22nd, I keep track. I was typically getting them between the 22nd and 24th of February. A block up between 500 and 1,000 between my oaks and neighbors' oaks. You go outside, you can't talk to anybody.
Wow, so loud.
And then I really budget them. If the idea is diversity is extremely important, and you were pointing that out. So if someone tells you, oh, we ought to take the cherry out because they're not important, yes, they are.
Yeah.
I think we want to thank you very much, Lance, for a great, useful information from that research. I think that's new
Yeah.
information for us. If you have personal questions, we probably have a
Yeah.
couple more minutes
Yeah.
afterward, but we can.
Yeah.
So thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you all. Oh.
Be sure to put April 15th on your calendar for our next one.
Yeah, you don't want to miss Ed Collins. Ed is kind of poetic